Hi guys, this is Ane from Anything for Geeks, and today we are going to do the part 2 of the Carboniferous video. So let's get started. First, if you're wondering why this is part 2, it was just because the video was just simply too long, so we decided to cut it in 2 parts. So if you haven't watched part 1, go watch it before you watch this, because we just start straight away from part 1. So yeah, go watch that, and let's get started. And Eriops was more of a land dweller. It was terrestrial and it was heavily built with straight, stocky legs. And it pretty much looked like a kind of like a salamander, but it wasn't a lot like a salamander. Like imagine a hippo, but with salamander-like skin and salamander-like ears and legs. But overall, it was a salamander modified to look like a hippo, and that was Eriops. And then, we had Diplocaulus, which was one of the major oddballs of the Carboniferous. And Diplocaulus was very flat, like it was about this thin. And Diplocaulus had a very big head shield, like a triangular shield for a head with tiny slits for eyes. And it was very reminiscent of a flattened version of the earlier jawless fish from the Ordovician, like Cephalaspis. And it was just in general an oddity to look at, but it was still pretty cool. And there were lots of other amphibians. For example, Westlothiana liziae is a recent found from Scotland. One thing, Scotland has most of the nice Carboniferous fossils. Scotland is a good place to look for Carboniferous fossils. And West Lothiana and a lot of other stuff from the Carboniferous was found in Scotland. And West Lothiana, well, it's a tetrapod, it's an amphibian, but it still very closely resembles reptiles or amniotes, because these early reptiles, so-called reptiles, also include the ancestors of mammals, and mammals are definitely not reptiles. And so we'll refer to them as amniotes in this series, because amniotes are characterized by the laying of an egg or the formation of an egg, and they lay an egg on land with a shell. Because amphibian eggs and tetrapod eggs and fish eggs, they're just like, little blobs with a thick coating of jelly-like substances around them, and they have to be laid in water. And they're pretty easy to swipe. Predators often go for fish eggs, including us, because caviar's a delicacy in European countries and here in America too. But amniote eggs are either carried in the body and the baby hatches in the body, and the baby just is born live, or the egg is laid in a nest and the egg is shelled. Reptiles have a leathery soft shell that is not very easy to penetrate, but is much more permeable, and more nutrients can get in, although it is softer and easier to break than bird eggs. Bird eggs are very hard. If you're an adult, or even if you're a kid, you've probably eaten an egg in your life. Otherwise, if you're poor, you can't afford eggs. But I don't think if you're poor enough to not afford an egg, you're probably not going to be watching this video right now. But for people who ate an egg, you know that you have to first break the shell, and people eat bird eggs mainly, and so the shell is hard, but it's pretty brittle and easy to crack. But in reptile eggs, like lizard eggs and turtle eggs, The shell is soft and leathery, but it's also very tough to break uh, by like crushing. But it's very easy to get into by piercing. And there's those differences, but those differences would only arrive very later on. And for the time being, Veslathiana laid non-amniotic eggs in water, but in all other respects, it was almost a reptile. And now we have finally the reptiles, the true amniotes, everything. We mentioned Veslathiana, but Hylonomus was the first true reptile and the first true amniote because it laid true shelled eggs, like leathery shelled eggs, and was completely unreliant on water for reproduction. And after Hylonomus, there was a mass expansion of reptiles. So much that the next period, the Permian, is called the Age of Reptiles. More on that later. But during the Carboniferous, reptiles just quickly jump-started and quickly became part of the new ecosystem. And there were a lot of variety in reptiles, although to the naked eye, there were just a bunch of lizard-like stuff running around. And let me remind you, lizards were not the first reptiles. Lizards evolved like during the age of the dinosaurs, really. And while these early reptiles may have looked like lizards, they were in no means lizards, and only a few were the ancestors of lizards at all. So after Hylonomus, and actually during the Hylonomus's a brief time, there are other reptiles. For example, there was Petriacanthosaurus, and then there was its close relative Ariosceles, and these were true reptiles. They were the ancestors of the diapsids and the euryapsids. And you'll keep hearing these apsids, blank apsids stuff. It just basically, so reptiles and mammals are differentiated based on how many holes and where those holes are in their skull. These holes are called fenestrae or windows in Latin, and fenestrae are very important. They make it so that the skeleton is lighter, and this would help for some animals later on. Wink, wink. Spoiler alert. But so these fenestrae differentiate all the reptile groups, including mammals. And diapsids are the reptiles that we usually think of as reptiles when you think of reptiles. Lizards, crocs, gators, the snakes, those are diapsids. Most importantly, the dinosaurs are part of this group, and which means that through cladograms, which are basically just evolutionary diagrams, and by evolutionary history, birds are also included in the diapsida. And euryapsids are split off from diapsids. They're the marine reptiles, or they would become the marine reptiles that evolved in the age of the dinosaurs, such as ichthyosaurs and ichthyosauromorphs. But the other marine reptiles, like mosasaurs and plesiosaurs, were actually diapsids as well. So euryapsids, they're actually a pretty mysterious group. Not much about them is known, except for the ichthyosaurs. We have found like a ton of ichthyosaurs. They're among the first fossils to be found. But the euryapsids are like that, and the diapsids too. But the other two groups, the synapsids and the anapsids, were different. Anapsids had no holes in their skulls, and they were not airheads. And today's anapsids include turtles, tortoises, and terrapins, and animals closely related to that, but most of them are extinct now. And then synapsids are mammals and their close relatives. So we are mammals. Pet dogs and cats are mammals. Hamsters and rabbits, deer. Those are synapsids. And there were also other stuff like, there was the saber-toothed mammal ancestor. Actually, mammal ancestors, I should say, because there were tons of saber-toothed mammal ancestors at that time. Mammal-like reptiles. I prefer the term synapsids because mammal-like reptiles implies that they were just like mammals, and they're not really true reptiles. They're amniotes. They actually belong in the Parareptilia, which are the like reptiles. So they're more like the reptile-like mammals, and these were called Gorgonopsians, and some include Gorgonops, which was named after the group. Actually, no, the group was named after it, and then Inostrancevia. But these are more of in the Permian, and we'll continue on that in the next video. So in the Carboniferous, the first synapsid was Archaeopteryx, which didn't look very different from the diapsids and the rhapsids, which is Petracanthosaurus, Inarioscylus. And anapsids were basically animals that directly descended from Hylonomus, and eventually they took the form that we see today, the strange form that is modern turtles with their shells and then box shells. And you gotta give anapsids credit, like Galapagos tortoises are anapsids, and they're one of the oldest living creatures in the world. Like, not the oldest, but like they live very long. Like, they live over 100 years. Not like the species, but the individuals live over 100 years long, which is a pretty amazing feat considering we die usually at like age 80 or so. I mean, there are people who surpassed 100, like people have been 105, but no one's ever been 120, like above 120. So you gotta give the anapsids credit. And the synapsids, you gotta give them credit because, they made us, which possibly could be the destruction of the Earth, but still you gotta give us credit because, we're the most intelligent animals that on Earth so far. There are still probably other intelligent stuff out there, and there's probably going to be even more intelligent descendants of humans in the future, millions and millions and millions of years later. But only time will tell, and still you gotta give the diapsids the credit because they made the dinosaurs, and thus with the help of the diapsids and the synapsids, we were able to make movies like Jurassic World. Because without us, there would not have been anybody for the dinosaurs to chomp on. And without the diapsids, there would have no dinosaurs to chomp on people. More on that later. So we had the reptiles, and then we had the trees. The oxygen levels grew, and then we had the humongous arthropods and the humongous trees. We had the amphibians all covered. And mentioning amphibians in reptiles, during the beginning of the Carboniferous, amphibians were nowhere to be found. There were no fossils of amphibians or reptiles during the first part of the Carboniferous, and this is called. And there were fossils, but during the very beginning, there was a short gap between the Devonian and the Carboniferous, in which there were pretty much no amphibians. Sure, there were amphibians, but none of them were well preserved. And this is called Roemer's Gap, in honor of paleontologist Alfred Roemer, who first noticed the gap, and the dude named it after himself. So we got Roemer's Gap, and then everything else pretty much Yeah, so to recap, a star explodes, it sends a death ray towards Earth, a lot of stuff is blasted out and becomes zombified. It's basically like an apocalypse novel. But then life returns, and then there are no amphibians to be found for the first few million years in the fossil record. And then what happened is, and then there were lots of trees which increased the oxygen level, which made humongous arthropods, and then there were humongous amphibians that were very odd, and then that led to tiny reptiles which would soon become humongous in their turn as well. And then we named it the Carboniferous period because there were lots of trees which died, and then they just turned into coal. And coal is a compound made of carbon. More on that carbon stuff. You see, usually trees decompose and just go back into organic matter in the soil, and then new plants and trees can use that matter for nutrients. And what happens is, but the fungi usually decompose these trees and turn them into organic matter. But during the Carboniferous, there were very few fungi, and so most of the trees during the Carboniferous that died slowly rotted with the help of some bacteria and stuff like that. But they eventually turned into coal deposits, and coal is used for powering stuff, and so that was pretty important for us. Because that there were no mushrooms during the Carboniferous, because otherwise there would not have been enough power for us or for anybody, and without power I cannot take this video and you could not watch this video or anything to do with this. And yeah, so we got a lot to owe for the Carboniferous. And because of that, we pretty much named the Carboniferous after carbon, because coal is a compound of carbon. The word Carboniferous comes from Latin carbo, which means coal, and ferrous is a conjugation of Latin, which means carrier. And so Carboniferous means coal carrier, or more scientifically, carbon carrier, because it's provided us with more than enough coal to last us, but we apparently managed to find a more use than we probably should have for that coal, and thus I'm able to talk to you. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. It was pretty long, like 40 minutes actually. And as always, please remember to subscribe and like, share, comment, watch more videos on my channel, blah blah blah. And stay tuned for the next video, the perilous Permian. And oh yeah, we have mass extinction in the Permian. Spoiler alert, close this video right now if you don't want to hear anything that might spoil the next video. But in the Permian, or the end of the Permian, we finally come across the end of a whole era. Finally. And then we get the dinosaurs, which involves something that's called, spoiler alert, the Great Dying, which is not so great for those who were involved in the dying. Bye!